Welcome to another episode of Steele Creek Explorer. I'm your host, Jeremy Stout, and this time it's late in the summer. We've had an extra rainy year, and that means there's some fungus among us. This is a great time to talk about mushrooms. Well, we're out here in Hemlock Hollow, and I've improvised a table here so we can talk a little bit and learn the basic biology about mushrooms. Of course, fungi, fungus in general. When most people think fungus, they think mushrooms, and everybody has this idea of a mushroom or a toadstool in their head. But these are absolutely a fascinating and a diverse group of organisms. And while many of us see them, out in the woods, growing seemingly out of the ground, they appear very plant-like. But of course, mushrooms are not plants. They're not even related to plants. If you remember your basic school biology, you remember that plants make their own food. They take the light of the sun, they turn that light energy into chemical energy in a process we call photosynthesis. We have a name for that, for the plants and the plant-like animals that do that. We call those autotrophs. Literally means self-feeding. Okay, we don't do that. We humans and other animals, we are in a group called heterotrophs. That means different feeding. We have to eat our food. We can't make our own. Guess which category all of our fungus falls into? That's right, these are heterotrophs. This allies the mushrooms and the other fungus with animals, with critters. What that means is, even though this seems very plant-like, this pretty little orange mushroom is actually more related to you and me than it is to, say, this maple tree behind me here. Okay? Wow, so mushrooms are incredibly interesting. They're very important in nature. Lots of our fungi are decomposers. They grow, from the ground, and they're growing on dead and decaying plant matter oftentimes, and just organic matter in general. They come in a huge diversity. Of course, not all of them are mushrooms or fall under this toadstool shape. You also have the familiar shelf fungi that you might see growing out of the side of a rotten log or a tree that's got an injury to it. And then as far as the typical mushroom-shaped fungus goes itself, those come in a couple of very important distinctions. You either have the gilled mushrooms, and you can see those gills underneath this mushroom here. And some of the others, this is a gorgeous big fat specimen we found laying down, probably of a fungus called Old Man of the Woods, although this is an interesting look. This does not appear to have gills. This is a mushroom, but it's not a gilled mushroom. And of course, there are lots of other fungus as well. There are the cup fungi, the sac fungi. There are the fungi that are microbial and sometimes attack our garden plants. Some of the smuts and the rusts are different kinds of funguses. There is enormous diversity out there in nature, and even at Steele Creek Park. We're going to take you out there and show you some of the ones we can find. We didn't have to go far into the woods at all to find it. Just an absolutely beautiful wild mushroom out here. Now, you'll have to excuse me at home. I love all aspects of nature, but fungi really aren't my specialty. I'm much more of a vertebrates and a rocks and a fossils kind of guy. But this is a gorgeous little woodland mushroom, and I'm reasonably sure it's one of the scale caps. There's a number of species of them, but they oftentimes come in bright yellows and oranges, and they often have these rugose, these very pitted stalks and stems. And this is likely maybe a species like flame scale cap or fir scale cap. I know a lot of those mushrooms really prefer dead and decaying conifer wood. And here we are in a hemlock forest, that's a conifer. So this would be prime habitat for a number of the scale cap mushrooms, which is probably what this one is right here. Absolutely gorgeous specimen. pretty little mushroom. This one will probably get much larger. It's a young one right now. At first glance, this looks like it might be one of the boletes. It's got a lot of red on top and a thin white stalk, but this is a gilled mushroom. And I'm not sure exactly which species this is, but it looks an awfully lot like a species that's common name is sickener. And as you can imagine, the sickeners are not edible mushrooms. They are poisonous. And so even if this isn't the species that this one is, these bright colors oftentimes in nature are warnings that they are poisonous to something. And oftentimes that's us. Just a little further into the woods and we found one of these gorgeous shelf mushrooms growing off the side of this tree. As I mentioned, I showed you the loose one. This is how they grow. They oftentimes grow on already dead wood. Of course, this tree looks like it might be a tulip poplar, is very much still alive, but they tend to grow out of wounded or dead tissues on the tree. And this is a very young one. It's hard to say what species it is, what it's going to grow up to look like. It might be one of the maize gills that look a lot like this, especially on the underside. But beautiful little mushroom growing on the side of a tree. You can see how they get the name shelf fungus or shelf mushroom. All right, this one's still a young one, but we have got a gorgeous fungus right here. This is one of the coral fungus. It's not readily identifiable as a mushroom, and these come in several different varieties, different species. Some of these can be vividly orange or purple. This is one of the more plain, drab colored ones. This may be the fungus called crown coral. But you can see how it gets the name coral fungus. They grow very much like coral of the oceans, which of course are colonies of animals. This is still very much in our kingdom of fungi. This is related to the mushrooms like the others we've found today. Really neat species growing in Steele Creek Park. Oh, this is great. We've got another one of these red-topped gilled mushrooms like we just saw, but this one has something else going on with it. This is not natural to the mushroom. You see, it looks like it's got a bite taken out. There are a number of things that will eat mushrooms, even mushrooms that are poisonous to us. But I think the identity of this mushroom eater has given itself away. If you notice, it looks as though this bite is almost taken out in a triangular shape from the mushroom. There is one mushroom-loving culprit who takes triangular-shaped bites out of things. Gardeners will know them from some of their low-hanging tomatoes sometimes, and this is likely the doing of an eastern box turtle. Of course, that's the tortoise-like turtle that lives in the woods. Many of us are familiar with box turtles. One of their favorite foods is mushrooms. Box turtles can eat so many mushrooms that are poisonous to us, that the box turtles themselves can actually become poisonous. In fact, there's an advisory to not eat box turtles. There's many reasons you shouldn't eat a box turtle, but not the least of which is that they can eat so many mushrooms that they actually accumulate those toxins in their bodies. Why this box turtle just took one big bite and went on about its way is anybody's guess. Maybe it's because the diversity we found has been so great that he's been absolutely gorged on mushrooms, and all he could muster was one bite before moving on his way. Very cool. Okay, well, we're talking about mushrooms, and I have to be very clear, this right here is not a mushroom. Although many folks find these growing in the woods, they wonder what they are. Here's one that's broken. I would never pick one of these myself. This is actually, it looks like a fungus at first. This is a plant. This is a true wildflower, and when I show it to you, you can see that it's got a wildflower. It has leaves. It has all of the anatomy of a plant. It's got roots, but what it doesn't have is chlorophyll. This is one of the few plants in the world that doesn't do photosynthesis. You remember we talked at the beginning of this episode, the difference between mushrooms and plants. The big difference is that plants undergo photosynthesis. Well, this plant actually doesn't. This is a plant that has secondarily adapted to lose its ability to make its own food. It actually lives very much like a mushroom. It gets its nutrition from decaying matter in the soil. It can grow in low light conditions, very much like a mushroom and very unlike a plant. But this is a plant. It's a wildflower, and it goes by the name Indian pipe. You can see how it gets its name when you turn it up. It also has some other colorful names like ghost flower or corpse plant. But again, this is not a mushroom. This is a true wildflower, but it's a wildflower that very much wants to be a mushroom. Well, I hope you've enjoyed learning a few of Steele Creek Park's native mushrooms with us this time. You'll notice that in this episode we didn't talk about edibility, and there's a reason for that. Yes, several of our species of mushrooms locally are edible, but many of them, very many of them, are extremely poisonous. So my rule of thumb is I prefer to only eat mushrooms that I find in grocery stores and in restaurants. Of course, we hear folks talk about morel mushrooms, which yes, are a delicacy and they're perfectly fine for you, but many don't know that there's also a false morel that looks a lot like the morel mushroom but is actually poisonous. Some of the shelf fungus that we talked about today are edible if they've been prepared a certain way, but they can be toxic or even poisonous if they haven't been prepared exactly right. So that's beyond the scope of what we'd like to talk about. We just want to take time to appreciate mushroom diversity and show you a few of those, but definitely get outside, get into nature, especially in Steele Creek Park, because that's where you can be the explorer.